What if I told you lunch wasn't always a quick bite or a midday break? In 1923, behind the guarded hedges of America's most exclusive country clubs, lunch was a performance, a refined ritual of luxury and social power. There were no burgers, no fries. Instead, lobster chilled in aspic, quail baked into golden crusts, and salads sculpted like fine art. These dishes weren't just meals, they were moments. But as time marched on, they quietly disappeared. Buried in yellowing menus, forgotten recipe cards, and fading memories. Until now. Today, we're opening the doors to a lost world, reviving 30 forgotten high-class American family recipes served during elite country club luncheons in 1923. Each dish is a portal to another time when food spoke in whispers of class, sophistication, and culinary perfection. And wait until you see what's at number 30, a dish so rare, most modern chefs have never even heard of it. In the summer of 1923, amid white linen tables and echoing laughter beneath parasols, one dish stole the spotlight at America's most elite country clubs: cold lobster à la Parisienne. It wasn't just food. It was elegance on a plate. Poached lobster tails, gently chilled, sliced with precision and arranged in a fan, served not warm, but cold, like a gemstone resting on crushed ice. It was nestled on a bed of crisp butter lettuce, dressed in a velvety Parisienne sauce, a blend of mayonnaise, cream, lemon juice, and capers, with just a hint of tarragon. To diners of the time, this dish symbolized refinement. Fresh lobster was still a luxury in 1923, and refrigeration technology was relatively new. The very act of serving shellfish cold was a modern marvel. It proved the host had money, taste, and access to the finest seafood available. But what made it Parisienne wasn't just the sauce, it was the French attitude: artful, minimal, and precise. Everything from the placement of the lobster claws to the symmetry of the garnish: peeled grape tomatoes, slivered cucumbers, and a dash of paprika was a statement of controlled beauty. Country clubs served it as the crown jewel of summer luncheons. Socialites in silk gloves would delicately fork each bite, while sipping chilled Chablis. It was cool, clean, and sophisticated, just like the world it belonged to. Yet somehow, as fast food took over and American lunches turned rushed and greasy, this dish faded into obscurity. But today, it's time to bring it back. This isn't just lobster. This is cold lobster à la Parisienne. A forgotten legend from the gilded summer tables of 1923. Before chicken salad became a deli staple or picnic filler, it was once a refined delicacy, a centerpiece of high society luncheons in the early 1920s. In 1923, at exclusive country clubs tucked away from the bustling cities, chicken salad in lettuce cups with paprika mayonnaise was a quiet yet powerful display of class. No frills, no fuss, just elegance wrapped in green. The chicken wasn't chopped carelessly, it was poached slowly, often in a court bouillon flavored with onion, celery, and bay leaf. Then cooled, shredded by hand, and folded into a rich dressing: homemade mayonnaise, a touch of sour cream or cream cheese, celery for crunch, and sometimes chopped gherkins or grapes for a hint of sweetness. But what truly set this dish apart? The paprika mayonnaise. Smoky, slightly sweet Hungarian paprika, still a novelty in American kitchens, was blended into the creamy base to add color and depth. Not overpowering, just enough to whisper sophistication. The entire salad was spooned gently into crisp, cupped leaves of Bibb or iceberg lettuce, chosen for their structural beauty and bite. These edible cups were placed on chilled plates, often garnished with sprigs of parsley, olives, or hard-boiled egg slices. To the untrained eye, it looked simple. But to the country club elite, this was restraint and refinement in perfect balance. Each bite was cool, creamy, and refreshing, designed to delight without overwhelming. A dish that allowed conversation and summer breezes to take center stage. As the jazz age bloomed and women's fashion changed, so too did dining.
Light, feminine, and graceful dishes like this one defined the midday meal.
And then, it disappeared. But not anymore.
Because this is more than just chicken salad. It's a taste of 1923 luxury served in a lettuce cup and wrapped in thyme.
Delicate. Transparent. Almost glowing. In 1923, no elegant luncheon table was complete without one striking centerpiece, the molded aspic. And among the most refreshing? Cucumber and mint aspic, a dish as beautiful as it was bold. Aspics were culinary fashion statements. Using gelatin was a mark of modernity, signaling that a host had access to refrigeration and the newest culinary techniques. And this particular aspic, with its slices of paper-thin cucumber suspended in a mint-scented jelly, was the height of summer elegance. It began with fresh cucumber juice, pressed and strained to capture the green essence of the vegetable. This was blended with lightly salted consommé or chicken stock, clear as glass. Then came the mint, just enough to cool the palate, never enough to overpower. Unflavored gelatin brought everything together. The mixture was carefully poured into small individual molds, often copper or ceramic, each lined with cucumber rounds placed with surgical precision. As the aspic set in chilled storage rooms or iceboxes, anticipation built. When unmolded just before serving, the aspics jiggled gently, light shimmering across their translucent surfaces. They were plated with a sprig of mint, sometimes a dab of horseradish cream or a dollop of sour cream with lemon zest. Country club members adored it, not just for its flavor, but its quiet drama. It was a cooling interlude between richer dishes. A palate cleanser. A work of edible art. But over time, aspics became misunderstood. Overdone in mid-century cookbooks, they faded from favor, mocked, then forgotten. Yet in 1923, a cucumber and mint aspic was more than a side, it was a symbol. Of grace. Of restraint. Of a lunch where even gelatin spoke of wealth. Now, it returns from history not just to be seen, but savored. They may look simple. But in 1923, these little halves held the kind of flavor that whispered luxury and screamed sophistication. Deviled eggs with anchovy cream weren't picnic food. They were an hors d'oeuvre fit for white-gloved hands and monogrammed cocktail napkins, served at country club luncheons where every detail mattered, even the yolk of an egg. At its core, the deviled egg is a classic, hard-boiled, halved, and filled. But at elite tables of the Roaring Twenties, ordinary mustard and mayo wouldn't do. Instead, the yolks were pressed through fine sieves, blended with softened butter, a touch of Dijon, a hint of lemon, and the real star, anchovy cream. Anchovy paste was considered a gourmet ingredient then, imported from Europe and prized for its umami richness. When whipped into cream, it became silky, salty, and deeply savory enough to elevate the humble egg into an aristocratic bite. The filling was piped, never spooned, into each half with decorative flair, then dusted with a trace of cayenne or sweet paprika for color. Sometimes garnished with capers, watercress, or a sliver of anchovy on top, each deviled egg became a jewel on silver trays, passed between guests with soft-spoken grace. They weren't just an appetizer. They were conversation starters. Icebreakers between garden club gossip and business deals over iced tea. And because they were small, guests could indulge again and again without seeming greedy. Yet as tastes modernized, anchovies lost their appeal in American homes. These eggs faded from menus, overshadowed by safer, blander versions. But now, they return not as party fare, but as a reminder of the boldness that once defined American high society. Of a time when even an egg had presence. This is deviled eggs with anchovy cream, sharp, smooth, and utterly unforgettable. In an era where elegance was measured not just by silverware, but by subtlety, few dishes said refinement like a perfectly clear, chilled tomato consommé. Served in delicate glass cups or porcelain bowls, chilled tomato consommé with basil croutons was a staple of 1923 country club luncheons, cool, composed, and reserved for those who understood restraint. Making consommé was no easy task. It required patience, skill, and clarity literally. Ripe tomatoes were simmered slowly with carrots, celery, onion, and a bouquet garni. Then came the raft, a mixture of egg whites and crushed vegetables used to clarify the broth. As it simmered, the impurities rose and were caught in the raft, leaving behind a crystal-clear liquid deeply flavored, yet pristine in appearance. Once strained and cooled, the consommé turned a warm, translucent rose, a reflection of the summer sun itself. But the magic didn't stop there. Floating gently on top were basil croutons, tiny cubes of toasted brioche brushed with olive oil and rubbed with fresh basil. Crisp, aromatic, and just herbal enough to lift the broth's natural sweetness. This wasn't soup. It was a statement. At high society luncheons, this dish was often the first course, a gentle opening to a long, luxurious meal. Its clarity mirrored the era's ideals of modernism and purity. A quiet dish, yes, but one that required culinary discipline and respect. Over time, consommé fell out of fashion, too much work, too little flash. But in 1923, it was considered the mark of a serious kitchen. And now, like a photograph developed in slow motion, it returns. Chilled tomato consommé with basil croutons, a forgotten first course, revived from the cool, glass-topped tables of America's most elegant afternoons. Before Lobster Newburg ruled the banquet halls, there was another version gracing the white tablecloths of country club luncheons, Shrimp Newburg in Puff Pastry Shells. Decadent yet delicately portioned, this dish was a showstopper in 1923. Served warm but never heavy, it blended French elegance with American bravado, just the kind of fusion high society adored. The base was succulent shrimp, poached gently in court bouillon to preserve their sweet, briny flavor. They were then folded into a velvet Newburg sauce, a lush blend of egg yolks, butter, heavy cream, and a dash of sherry or cognac. The key was balance, richness without excess, and just enough liquor to perfume without overpowering. But what truly elevated this dish? The puff pastry shells, known as vol au vent. These delicate, hollowed pastries were baked until golden and flaky, each one rising like a crown. When filled with the hot, creamy shrimp mixture, they softened just enough to melt in the mouth, while still holding their elegant structure. At luncheons, they arrived on fine china, garnished with parsley or paprika, and always served individually, never shared. Each bite was a private indulgence, a moment of luxury tucked inside buttery layers. To guests in 1923, this was modern dining, French-influenced, American-served, and designed to impress without overwhelming. It told your guests you had class, connections, and a French-trained chef. But as decades passed, Newburg faded from menus written off as too rich, too fussy. Shrimp became cocktail fare, and puff pastry was boxed and forgotten. Yet this dish deserves a comeback. Because Shrimp Newburg in Puff Pastry Shells isn't just food. It's edible architecture. A masterpiece of texture, history, and indulgence served at the golden hour of American dining. It glistened like marble. It sliced like silk. And in 1923, it was the height of culinary prestige, served only to those who dined behind gates and garden walls. This is molded salmon mousse with dill cream, a dish so delicate, it felt more like sculpture than food. At the country clubs of the early 20th century, molded foods weren't a gimmick, they were gourmet. They required skill, confidence, and cold kitchens. This salmon mousse was no exception. It began with fresh poached salmon, flaked until fine and mixed with whipped cream, lemon juice, and a whisper of cayenne. A touch of gelatin transformed the blend into a smooth, spoonable mixture, one that could hold its shape without losing its elegance. But presentation was everything. The mousse was pressed into copper or porcelain molds, sometimes shaped like fish, sometimes like roses, and chilled for hours in iceboxes lined with block ice and sawdust. Once unmolded, it emerged pale pink and flawless, garnished with cucumber ribbons, lemon wheels, or sprigs of dill. Served alongside was the dill cream, a cool, tangy sauce of sour cream, chopped dill, and vinegar or lemon, spooned gently over or beside the mousse. It balanced the richness and gave the dish its signature fragrance. This wasn't just for flavor, it was theater. The molded mousse shimmered in the sunlit dining rooms, placed at the center of linen-covered tables. Guests didn't just eat it, they admired it. But as time passed and gelatin became associated with jiggly salads and mass-market desserts, dishes like this vanished from memory. Now, it returns. Molded salmon mousse with dill cream, a forgotten centerpiece of elite luncheons, where every detail was designed to impress. And every bite whispered of wealth, precision, and summer elegance. In the grand dining rooms of 1923 country clubs, chicken simply wasn't grand enough. When true refinement was required, hosts turned to a nobler bird, the capon. This is breast of capon with Madeira jelly, a dish that didn't shout for attention, but quietly proved its pedigree with every silky bite. Capon, a castrated rooster raised slowly for tenderness, was considered superior to chicken in both flavor and texture. Its meat was more delicate, more refined. And in elite American kitchens of the early 20th century, it was a symbol of culinary status. The breast was gently poached in a savory broth, seasoned with bay leaves, peppercorns, and celery hearts. Once cooled, it was sliced into medallions, pale and tender, then carefully arranged on chilled platters. But what made this dish unforgettable was the Madeira jelly, a gleaming, amber glaze made from clarified stock, fortified with aged Madeira wine, and set with just enough gelatin to hold form without stiffness. It was brushed over the capon or poured around it in decorative molds, catching the light like stained glass. To country club guests, this dish was both nourishing and noble. It didn't rely on spice or heat, but on poise, texture, and balance. The rich, slightly sweet Madeira elevated the mildness of the capon into something transcendent. Accompanied by a celery root remoulade or chilled haricots verts, it was often served during midday luncheons in warm months, when hot roasts were unthinkable, and cold meats reigned supreme. But as capons became harder to find and jelly dishes fell out of favor, this elegant pairing disappeared from menus. Now, nearly a century later, it returns from the archives. Breast of capon with Madeira jelly, a forgotten emblem of luxury, grace, and a time when even cold poultry was elevated to art. In 1923, when the lunch bell rang at America's elite country clubs, it wasn't sandwiches that arrived, it was timbales. Structured, savory, elegant, and none more admired than ham timbales with sherry sauce. A timbale wasn't just a dish, it was a shape. A delicate, cylindrical mold, baked until golden and turned out onto porcelain plates like a savory soufflé with better posture. In this case, it was made from minced smoked ham, folded with eggs, cream, breadcrumbs, and nutmeg, a luxurious blend that puffed and set with gentle heat. The flavor? Smoky, velvety, with just a hint of sweetness from the cured ham. But the true elegance came with the sherry sauce, a golden, glossy reduction of veal stock and dry sherry, enriched with butter and sometimes a spoonful of cream. It was ladled generously over the timbale, soaking into its porous edges and pooling beneath like silk on a ballroom floor. Served individually, these ham timbales were a country club favorite not just for their taste, but their sophistication. Unlike roasts or cold cuts, timbales were labor-intensive, requiring precision, timing, and perfectly buttered molds. They proved a chef's skill and a host's affluence. Guests would cut into the delicate form with silver forks, the timbale yielding like custard, the sherry sauce offering a warm, fortified finish. Paired with a light watercress salad or glazed baby carrots, it was a dish that whispered luxury without a single garnish out of place. But as American tastes grew simpler and sherry fell out of fashion, these sculpted savories faded from our collective plate. Today, they return as edible echoes from the past. Ham timbales with sherry sauce, structured grace, smoked richness, and a taste of country club sophistication, from a time when lunch was an event, not an afterthought. Sometimes, elegance hides in plain sight. In the grand luncheons of 1923, amid ornate aspics and towering pastries, there was one quiet dish that never failed to impress the discerning eye. Celery hearts à la crème. Not celery sticks. Not crudité. But the hearts, the most tender, pale yellow-green stalks hidden at the core of the bunch. In the kitchens of exclusive country clubs, they were treated like royalty. The preparation was deceptively simple, but exacting. The celery hearts were carefully trimmed, peeled for tenderness, then blanched in lightly salted water until just soft. The real transformation came next. A rich white sauce, béchamel, made from butter, flour, and milk, was stirred slowly over low heat until it turned velvety smooth. Into this, a splash of cream, a touch of grated nutmeg, and a pinch of white pepper. The blanched celery was folded in, then gently warmed in the sauce until every stalk was cloaked in warmth and richness. It was then plated in neat rows on warm china, sometimes sprinkled with a dusting of Parmesan or garnished with parsley tips. Celery, you see, wasn't just a garnish in 1923, it was a status vegetable. Served warm and luxurious, à la crème, it became a dish of grace and quiet power. It paired beautifully with roast capon, salmon mousse, or any cold entree, offering a mild but comforting contrast. In a world that valued subtlety over flash, this dish held its own. But over time, as cream sauces fell out of fashion and celery lost its place at the center of the table, the dish slipped into obscurity. Now, nearly a century later, we bring it back. Celery hearts à la crème, a forgotten side, reborn with elegance, softness, and the soul of a bygone luncheon. If ever there was a dish that whispered sophistication with every bite, it was this one. Artichoke Bottoms Stuffed with Truffled Chicken, a crown jewel of 1923 country club luncheons. Artichokes weren't just vegetables, they were delicacies. Imported or painstakingly trimmed by hand, their hearts were prized, but it was the bottoms, firm, bowl-like, and slightly nutty, that became elegant vessels for refined fillings. Enter the truffled chicken. White meat chicken was poached slowly in a light broth until tender, then finely minced and folded with cream, butter, and just a hint of seasoning. But the defining ingredient? Black truffle, grated or finely chopped, lending its earthy, aromatic magic to the mix. In the 1920s, truffles were rare, imported luxuries used sparingly but with great effect. Each artichoke bottom was filled with the chicken mixture and topped with a blanket of Mornay or velouté sauce. Then, the tray was placed under a gentle broiler, just long enough to warm and lightly brown the tops. What emerged was a study in texture and taste, tender artichoke base, creamy, fragrant chicken center, and a golden sauce that tied everything together. Served in silver trays or porcelain ramekins, these stuffed artichokes were passed at ladies' luncheons and afternoon society affairs, dainty enough to eat with a fork, yet rich enough to linger in memory. The presentation was compact, but the flavor? Deep, elegant, unforgettable. Yet as truffles became scarce and artichokes inconvenient, this dish, like so many others, quietly vanished from modern menus. But not today. Today, we revive it from the pages of forgotten menus and the dining rooms of 1923. Artichoke bottoms stuffed with truffled chicken, a dish of subtle drama, rich history, and the unmatched elegance of a lost American table. In the grand dining rooms of 1923 country clubs, not all refinement was dainty. Some of it came wrapped in buttery pastry, hiding bold flavor beneath a delicate golden crust. This was quail pie with herb crust, a dish that brought the wild game traditions of old America into the polished world of white tablecloths and garden view luncheons. Quail, the aristocrat of poultry, was prized for its tender, dark meat and rich, slightly gamey flavor. In the early 20th century, It was often hunted on private estates or delivered fresh from specialty farms. For this pie, the birds were gently braised with mirepoix, carrot, onion, and celery and a touch of white wine, until the meat fell from the bone. The flesh was shredded, combined with wild mushrooms, herbs like thyme and marjoram, and bound in a light cream reduction infused with pan drippings. The filling was savory, silky, and deeply aromatic. But the star was the herb crust, a short, flaky pastry infused with chopped parsley, chives, and a touch of sage. It wasn't just a cover, it was a contrast. Earthy, crisp, and fragrant, it elevated the pie from rustic to regal. Baked until bubbling and golden, quail pies were served in individual ramekins or elegantly sliced from a larger mold. Often accompanied by buttered peas or a chilled salad, they were a favorite for cooler months and autumn luncheons. This was no heavy meat pie. It was light yet luxurious. And it required effort, a kitchen that understood timing, texture, and patience. Over time, as game faded from everyday cooking and pastry crusts gave way to convenience, quail pie disappeared from our tables. But today, it returns. Quail pie with herb crust, a forgotten classic, where wild game meets high society, and every bite tells a story from America's lost golden tables. In 1923, not every luxurious bite came from the obvious cuts. Some of the most cherished delicacies came from ingredients known only to the culinary elite. Enter sweetbread patties with Mornay sauce, a dish that whispered quiet sophistication on every porcelain plate. Sweetbreads, despite the name, aren't sweet, and they're not bread. They're the tender, creamy textured thymus glands of young veal or lamb. And in early 20th century high society, they were a prized delicacy served only in the most refined kitchens. To prepare them properly was an art. The sweetbreads were first soaked in cold water, then blanched, peeled, and pressed to remove excess moisture. After that, they were diced and lightly sautéed in butter until golden, retaining their soft, almost custard-like interior. They were then folded into a rich, silken Mornay sauce, a classic béchamel enriched with egg yolks and grated Gruyère or Parmesan. The result? A creamy, nutty, slightly tangy mixture that elevated the mild sweetbreads into something magnificent. This filling was spooned into buttery patty shells, baked to a golden puff. Each shell was crisp on the outside, tender in the center, and served individually, never heaped, never rushed. At luncheons, these patties were often the centerpiece of a second course. Light enough to follow a consommé, yet rich enough to stand alone. They were paired with a small salad or braised greens, and always served with grace. Today, sweetbreads are rare, and the techniques to cook them even rarer. But in 1923, they represented luxury, culinary skill, and quiet opulence. Now, we bring that moment back. Sweetbread patties with Mornay sauce, a forgotten masterpiece of texture, taste, and timeless refinement, when food was both a craft and a statement. In 1923, even leftovers were dressed in silk. At high society country clubs, nothing was wasted, but nothing looked ordinary either. One shining example? Lamb croquettes with tarragon mayonnaise, humble in origin, yet impossibly refined in execution. Croquettes were of French import, golden cylinders or ovals, crisp on the outside, creamy inside. But at country club luncheons, they weren't filled with mashed potatoes or filler meats. No! These were made with finely minced roast lamb, often leftovers from a formal dinner, transformed into something entirely new. The lamb was mixed with a savory béchamel, finely chopped herbs, shallots, and just a hint of lemon zest. It was then shaped by hand, rolled in fresh breadcrumbs, and fried until delicately crisp. The result? A croquette that shattered at first bite, revealing warm, savory lamb with a luxuriously soft center. But the secret weapon came on the side or drizzled artfully across the top: tarragon mayonnaise. Made in-house, this rich, creamy sauce was infused with fresh tarragon, an herb beloved by French chefs and admired in American elite circles for its anise-like aroma. It brought brightness, elegance, and a whisper of complexity to the deep flavor of lamb. These croquettes weren't tossed on plates. They were presented in neat rows, often atop small rounds of toast or frisee, garnished with thin slices of radish or olive oil pearls. To guests, they were a delightful surprise, comfort food reimagined for the elite. Each bite was warm, crisp, and herbaceous, balanced perfectly by the creamy, floral mayonnaise. But like so many delicacies from the past, they faded. Lamb became rare at luncheons. Tarragon was forgotten. Now, they return. Lamb croquettes with tarragon mayonnaise, a forgotten triumph of taste and texture, when even the humble croquette wore white gloves. Not every course needs to dazzle with fire and flair. Sometimes, true elegance lies in the restraint, the balance between freshness, flavor, and finesse. In the quiet moments before dessert, came a dish like this: petite green bean salad with Roquefort dressing, simple, yes, but never plain. At 1,923 country club luncheons, chilled salads weren't afterthoughts, they were palate cleansers, served between rich main courses and delicate sweets. And this one? It was a study in texture and bold, blue-veined beauty. Tender haricots verts, French-style green beans, were trimmed and blanched just until vivid green and slightly crisp. They were immediately plunged into ice water, locking in color and snap. Once chilled, they were arranged in neat bundles or gentle fans, each one glistening with precision. But the true star was the Roquefort dressing. Roquefort, a prized French blue cheese made from sheep's milk, was rare, imported, and considered bold even in refined circles. It was crumbled and folded into a creamy dressing of sour cream, white wine vinegar, Dijon mustard, and just a touch of honey to balance the tang. The combination was divine: crisp beans, chilled and bright, cloaked in a dressing that was rich, sharp, and unmistakably aristocratic. Garnishes were minimal, perhaps a sprinkle of walnuts, a few pearl onions, or a shaving of radish. The salad didn't need decoration. It was a quiet exhale after indulgence, a return to crisp, clean elegance. Today, green bean salad is a side dish. Forgettable. But back then? It was a moment. A pause. A final bow before the sweets arrived. Petite green bean salad with Roquefort dressing, a forgotten grace note from America's golden lunches, and the perfect ending to a meal where every course was dressed to impress.